listeners. Welcome. This is Michael Beach, and you are dialed into the What Are You Doing podcast. This is the show for thought leaders who are interested in investing in the next generation of leadership for their organization. This is also the show for emerging leaders who want to become that next generation of great leaders in their organization. If we all try to capture all of the untapped potential in ourselves and in everyone around us, together, we can develop leaders who will in turn develop more leaders. And along the way, we'll make a difference in our economy and in this troubled world. All of us at Michael Beach Coaching and Consulting are excited to be able to bring you another podcast episode today. We consider ourselves to be very fortunate to be engaged in the business of contributing to the success of forward-thinking, fast-growth companies. We're grateful to be able to help them to develop and cultivate great leaders at all levels of their companies. We love what we do for a living. It's rewarding and meaningful work. I'm especially excited today to have the opportunity to introduce you to today's special guest, an extraordinary leader, Maren Walseth, who just happens to be an executive development and leadership coach, running a company called Elevating Leaders, LLC. Maren has a very interesting background, as you're about to find out. She was an incredible student athlete at Penn State University, where she had the opportunity to play in the NCAA basketball Final Four, before going on to play professional basketball in the WNBA and in France. Maren has 10 years of experience as an assistant coach in basketball and 5 years of experience as a Division I head coach. Maren works with small business owners and athletic coaches, helping them to navigate the isolation and the loneliness of leadership at the top. Maren's also, interestingly enough, a college basketball television analyst. Wow, that's all I can say. You have a very versatile and extremely interesting background in life there, Maren. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Michael. What a great introduction. I'm excited for our conversation.
I am too, Maren. It's great to have you with us today. So let's start the conversation. Maren, I like to ask my guests about their musical interests. I've learned that you are a huge country music fan. Do you happen to have a favorite artist?
Clearly, I've spent a lot of time in athletics, and so you get to listen to just about anything in the locker room. But in my own car or away from the locker room, I am a country music fan, and Garth Brooks is, my favorite entertainer. I've been to a handful of concerts, and I just think he does a fantastic job.
He is outstanding. There's no question about it. Do you have a favorite song that you'd like to share?
I do. Actually, my favorite song, and it's been my favorite song for quite some time, is Man in Motion by John Parr from St. Elmo's Fire. Mm-hmm. So the part where he says, just once in his life, a man has his time, and my time is now. I'm coming alive. That is, if I was a baseball player or a softball player, that is my walk-up song right there.
Well, that's a terrific lyric, isn't it? At what moment in your life or career did you become interested in leadership, Maren?
That's a good question. And one, when I think about it, I think it's always kind of been in me. I think my parents instilled a confidence in me as a young kid to speak up, to speak my truth, to speak what I'm feeling or maybe what I wanted. Obviously, being the oldest child in our family had a little bit to do with that as well.
Sure.
But then transitioning into sports, I think sports drew it out of me a bit more as well. In competition and with teams, you needed your teammates, especially in a basketball court or, I played youth soccer. You can't do it by yourself. And so when you're competitive and then you want to win, you need your teammates. And so you're just constantly developing how to build those relationships, build that connection, pull them along, what makes them tick, what is their why for being there. So I
Mhm.
think the leadership has always kind of been in me.
Okay.
And I think in that respect, I've been a leader in some capacity, if only just leading myself. I think that's a huge component too, for all of my years.
Sure. I see a lot of parallels between athletics and sports and, the competitive marketplace of business. And I'm not surprised that you got involved in leadership as a byproduct of being involved in athletics and sports. How did you become involved in developing leaders and getting into the business that you're in now?
Seeing the comparisons and kind of seeing that the teams that companies put together or leadership groups within a company, an organization, an athletic department, so very similar to the teams that you're a part of with sport. And so I think you can think about, or some people think about the connection between like a boardroom and a locker room. And at first glance, that might be very different. And it's, man, those are two very different worlds, shirts and ties and, sweaty shorts. Like how can there be a whole lot of similarities there? When in reality, I think, there are more than there aren't. From the need to work together for whatever that common goal is, from having leadership, having followership. There's pressure involved in both scenarios.
Right.
Real-time decisions need to be made. In both scenarios, there's opportunity to gather input from others, which is incredibly valuable. But then, you're the CEO or you're, the primary leader in one of those environments. And sometimes decisions have to be made on the spot.
Right.
So there are more similarities than differences. And you might see that often student athletes turn into leaders of companies or have a lot of responsibility within organizations because they have time management. They've worked with difficult people. They've worked with fantastic people. They're accustomed to kind of the pressure cooker that upper level management and upper level leadership is, even though they haven't had that exact title, they've been in that environment, more often than not.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how often people who've been involved in sports and athletics and have gotten interested in competing and practicing to become the best they can be seem to do very, very well in business when they move on from their athletic pursuits. Maren, what's the accomplishment along the way that has given you the greatest sense of pride?
Leading a Division I women's basketball team. It comes with challenges, but understanding that relationships need to be built to recruit young women to be part of your organization, your program, your family, and then the opportunity and the responsibility to mentor, not just physically coach them on the basketball court with their skills and strategy, but mentor them and help open doors for them. The saying around college sports is they walk in the door as an 18-year-old, as a high school kid. Right. And by the time they leave, they're supposed to be ready for the real world. And so those 4 or maybe 5 years are so important and so impressionable in their maturation process, in the values that now they take on. It's not their family values necessarily. So knowing the impact that those 4 years and the people involved in those 4 or 5 years have on our young emerging leaders, I think that's a great sense of accomplishment, a great sense of pride for me.
That is a superb accomplishment. And, it sounds like an amazing opportunity to be able to contribute to your players' life success as well as their playing success on the basketball court.
It is. And it's not just about the points that they scored. It's about the young lady just, a couple of months ago graduating from chiropractic school, and now she's a doctor, or the nurse, the police officer that I've coached.
Mm-hmm.
It's those things, seeing the big pictures and seeing their dreams, come to fruition, and knowing that you were part of some of those really initial raw conversations.
I can imagine that's got to feel really fantastic to be a part of that. Maren, would you share with our listeners the greatest leadership advice that anyone has ever given you?
Yeah. Two quotes are coming to mind right now. And the first being, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And, originally that's a Theodore Roosevelt quote. And I think that's so true. You can't ask, whether you're in sports or in business or nonprofit or, anywhere, you can't ask people to do much unless they know you really care about them.
Right.
And I think that is so important. And especially, in my experiences of working with young people, they need to know you care. And once they know you care and genuinely care and can trust them, they'll do anything for you. But that's
right.
So very important. Second quote that I really like is, when people show you who they are, believe them.
Okay.
And that's a Maya Angelou quote. I think oftentimes as leaders, we spend a lot of time trying to change people.
Mm-hmm.
And although development and furthering skills and, opening their minds to new ideas is exactly what leadership is, we can't fundamentally change somebody. And so when, you're in this leadership position and you're working with others and they show you who they are and it's not where you're going, come to peace with that and move on. I think so many leaders spend unnecessary time trying to fundamentally change a person or change a thought or change something about the way one of their team members is thinking or operating. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that they're not following your leadership. They're not,
right.
the right fit for you. And changing your team is okay. So I kind of like that quote. When people show you who they are, they're not lying. Believe them.
I love that quote. It's a tremendous one. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, my next question, Maren, is, I find it fascinating that you coach both business leaders and also college sports coaches. Would you mind sharing some similarities that you see between boardrooms and locker rooms? We talked about that a little bit earlier, but I'd like to explore that a little deeper.
Yeah, we did. But I think, the obvious ones between that boardroom and the locker room, the necessity to work together and collaboration and sharing of knowledge and sharing of skills. Within that boardroom, somebody's the head coach of the finance department, and somebody's the head coach of human resources, and somebody's the head coach of safety, or, there's different units.
Right.
And that's the same as, in the locker room. Someone's strength is on offense. Somebody's strength is on defense. Somebody's strength is being a fantastic, bench player and hustle and grit, player. So there's different skills and different knowledge and different, areas of expertise within both. And you need it all to work together, to come together for that common goal. Maybe some of the other less obvious is there's a fierce competition. I think that unless you're in a boardroom, it can be looked at as a very quiet, everybody just, listens to one person speak and then we all walk out and we agree with everything.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case. There are strong ideas and, passionate comments being made and solutions being brought to the table. And so there's that fierce competitiveness. And that's the same thing in the locker room. But at the end of the day, when you walk out on the court to play that game, it doesn't, nobody cares what you thought should be run on defense. You've got to do what was decided upon.
Right.
Same thing in a boardroom. It doesn't matter if you thought this is the strategic plan we should follow, but we're following this one. You got to jump on board. And so that, letting go of your own personal goals and your own personal thoughts for the betterment
right.
of the team, that's very common in both of those places. I also think that, or let me rephrase that. I'm not sure that everybody understands how lonely leadership can be.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a senior captain in a locker room, you might be the only senior on the team.
Right.
And that is an incredibly lonely spot to be.
Yeah.
You're the one
imagine.
that everyone's like, well, you talk to the coaches, so it's your fault that we're doing this.
Right.
No, this is what's best for the team, and I've been through it, and so I can have a different perspective than you. Same thing with coaches, being the head coach of a program. It's a lonely spot. Who do you talk to about, some of the conflict that you're going through to make all this work? Same thing in a boardroom. Somebody's got to be the messenger, and someone's got to bring the unpopular conversation to the table. And that can be incredibly difficult and incredibly lonely. And you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself and those around you.
Right.
To bring something to the table that might not, go over as smoothly as, the last speaker spoke. So
right.
I think there's a lot more in common between boardrooms and locker rooms than initially meets the eye.
Yeah, no question. You were talking about the loneliness of leadership and the importance of getting together and having that spirited debate if you're going to have a debate. But once we've decided what play to call, there's no more time for debate. You just go out on the court and you run that play. Mm-hmm. I had an example of that happen yesterday with a business leader that I'm working with, and he has a middle level manager that he works with that is struggling to move on from the dialogue or the debate after the decision's been made. They want to keep grumbling and disagreeing, and that just can't happen. Everybody's got to rally together when it's time to go out on the court and run the play.
You're right.
You have the opportunity to work with athletic coaches in your coaching business, and we'd love to hear a little bit about your experience working with them in terms of any leadership gaps that you see with athletic coaches. Can you talk about that with us for a minute?
Sure, Michael. Everybody's unique and different, but a common denominator in moving up that, proverbial ladder within the coaching ranks is you're really good at either playing, you are a fantastic player, or there's one part of the game. You're a stellar recruiter. Your defensive schemes, your offensive schemes are, top notch.
Right.
And the management component, nobody, majors in management in high school. And, that's not why you got to college as an athlete. So once you attain that head coaching role, again, regardless of what division you're playing at, the management is often a gap of how to manage your staff. Sometimes your staff is older than you. Sometimes your staff has more experience, number of years of experience. In some situations that I've worked with, you're just a few years older than those players, so the management and how to manage personalities and egos, there's often a learning curve involved, because it's very different from being a great player to being a great manager of the organization or of the program, or in often cases, you're running a small business. You're in charge of budget, you're in charge of hiring, you're in charge of firing, you're in charge of recruiting, you're in charge of, fundraising and development. And, just because you could knock down threes 10 years ago doesn't mean you have any clue how to fundraise. There's a lot of gaps there that you just don't know until you don't know them. And, so there's some areas to learn and some learning curves there. That's a big one. Communication is also a big one. And I think that sounds funny. You're on teams your whole life. Right. You know how to communicate, but it's very different when you know how to do something versus verbalize, teach, and empower somebody else. I remember being a young assistant being like, well, just do it like this. Right. And the student athlete looking at me like, wasn't that what I did? No, you didn't. You do it like this. It's a skill. It takes some time to figure out how to articulate exactly what you're asking your student athletes or your staff members to do. And so I see that as being, again, a learning curve to how it all happens.
Fascinating, the parallels between athletics and business and leadership. You got to be a great leader in both arenas for sure. Maren, did you have any leadership mentors or coaches along the way who made a big impression on you or made a big investment in you?
Yeah. When I think about people, I also think about like my own doings, so to speak. And I'm a big reader. My mom was a high school reading teacher, so I read a lot. And in the college sports world, John Gordon, the author, has a ton of books, and they're floated around every locker room as a player, and then obviously every staff as well. Tim Glover's Relentless. I thought that was an incredibly powerful book. But when it comes to people, I think the first leader that really invested in me was probably my college coach, Renee Portland. The belief. I'd come out off of a ACL injury in high school, and she didn't pull a scholarship. She didn't, change her recruiting of me. She didn't change her story to me or anything. So that, that first belief when you're in a very vulnerable state, obviously being a high school player and then injured, she trusted me and she believed in me. And I think that I know that I took a lot of that, to my core. And then my second boss in the industry, Coquise Washington, she is currently an associate head coach at Notre Dame, but she was the head coach at Penn State University, which ironically is where I graduated from. But I did leave, and then I came back as an assistant coach there. She was just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Again, the belief and the trust, she really allowed me to fail. She handed over small projects, and we didn't know each other from anybody, the day I went to my interview. Right. And so we had a lot to learn and a lot of trust to be gained. But in small snippets, she threw me small tasks, let me fail, asked a lot of why. She valued all of our, her staff's input, but, I would come with things and she just asked me why and how can that be successful and how can I help you do that? And again, gave me a lot of confidence to involve others and that failing was okay. And on that staff, we also had Kia Damon. She's currently the head coach at Lafayette College here in Pennsylvania. And so we were peers. Now she had a few years of experience in the profession more than I did, but we spent so much time just having conversations, and she would question me with such intentional purpose of, again, why, how, where are you going with this? What makes sense? And I could tell that she was challenging me to grow, but she was also wanting to learn. And so it was a very mutual, dialogue. We're still great friends, but when I think back of, the people that really poured into me and helped me, Coquise Washington, Renee Portland, Kia Damon, those names come to mind, very, very quickly.
Well, that is awesome. I always love to let my guests tip their cap to the people who helped them on their way up, because you never know, they might hear this podcast and feel good about it.
Well, and I would certainly not be on this podcast without some of their investment. So I appreciate them.
Well, thank you for giving them the tip of the cap. Maren, I love your LinkedIn profile, which boldly says, stand taller, stretch further, and dive deeper. It occurs to me that those words are clearly great advice for a basketball athlete, but it also occurred to me that it might be terrific advice for an athletic coach or a business leader. What do you think?
You are right. I wrote those, or I put those up. I came to that tagline with the business world in mind. But you are right. When you think about standing taller, that's about confidence to me. And that's what that suggests. The confidence to stand taller, whether you're an athlete, a business owner, an emerging leader, you got to have your head up. You got to have your shoulders back. You have to play the part. And the stretch further, I mean, you and I both know, Michael, and so many of the listeners know that you don't grow until you get outside of your comfort zone. Right. And again, whether that's a student athlete, a business leader, an emerging leader, wherever you are, you must get outside. You must stretch yourself. And that's where we grow. And then the dive deeper, so many leaders, emerging leaders, established leaders have the will to do the work. And so it's continuing to take away layers of that onion, continuing to dive deeper, to ask the difficult questions, the hows and the whys, to pull out, your best self. And
right.
so that's how I came to the stand taller, stretch further, dive deeper.
I love it. I find it very inspirational. And it reminded me of a college volleyball tournament that I attended many, many years ago, where the Minnesota Gophers, where I went to college, their ladies volleyball team was playing in a really big tournament. And there was one particular player on the Gophers who just kept sacrificing for the team. The other team would be hitting these monstrous spikes. And this young lady was in the backcourt, and she was getting herself on the floor, and she must have had 15 or 20 welts on her elbows, knees, her forehead, because she just kept diving for these balls and making these miraculous saves. And in that day, at that tournament, she made the difference for the Gophers. They won the game. They ended up winning the tournament. And she was playing in an unbelievable role. Usually it's the spikers, right, who get all the glory. But this gal, my goodness, she was diving deeper. And you reminded me of that. So thank you for that, Maren.
You're welcome.
How much of a value, Maren, should an aspiring coach or leader place upon emotional intelligence when they're recruiting or developing players or great leaders?
I think emotional intelligence is huge, very, very important. And to me, that goes back to the Roosevelt quote of, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so that, to me, is very closely tied with empathy. And you must, in my opinion, be very in tune with your own emotional intelligence, because we can't, all have it all together all the time. And so you must be very in tune with what your strengths are, where
Sure.
your caveats are, where you're just not as comfortable.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, regardless, again, if you're in charge of the locker room or the boardroom, you're navigating and you're managing others. And so your emotional intelligence of being able to read others, be able to respond versus react, be able to know when to push, when to pull back, those are all, and more, are all
Right.
tied into emotional intelligence. And so when people question that or want to have some resistance, I just encourage them to, take a step back and say, well, what do you think the difference between the greats and the goods are?
Yeah.
Meaning we can all get to a level because of our tactical skills, because of our ability to perform, because of our business acumen, whatever that is. But why, with the combination of Tom Brady, why is Bill Belichick, so superior? Obviously,
Right.
this year we saw that he needs his quarterback, to help him run his show.
Right.
But at the same time, he's a gruff. He comes across in maybe an abrasive way in some capacities. But when you listen to some of the interviews with some of his players, he knows his players. He knows how to interact. He knows which ones need the extra, don't, need a pat on the back, need a kick in the butt. Obviously there's more in all of that as well. But that, comes into the emotional intelligence of being able to understand and be empathetic with those around you. And that's not soft. That's not letting people off the hook. But it's the connection and the responding versus the reacting.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I appreciate you sharing with us your viewpoint on it. Maren, can you tell our audience the primary concepts that you teach your emerging leaders about management and leadership?
That's a great question, Michael. There's so many areas to start. And, obviously every individual already comes into leadership with some, very strong skills. But one that I think is incredibly important is authenticity and being real and being relational. And I say that because for folks to follow, again, whether you're in the locker room or in a boardroom or running a company and have, 15 employees, people must be able to attach themselves or identify with you in some capacity to be able to follow you, to want to buy in, to want to maybe be stretched further than they're comfortable, do things that are new to them. And so the authenticity and the sharing of your true self while still holding the standards and the expectations can be hard for people. I think there are some leaders, or I've come across some leaders who feel the necessity to separate work from the real me. And unfortunately, those on your team can see right through that. And they want to know the real person because you're asking them to be real. So authenticity is a big one that I work with my clients on, and that we have conversations about a lot. Mm-hmm. I would say the second is taking input. That's one thing that I learned from Coquise Washington in my second role, my second job as an assistant coach at Penn State, was how often she asked for our input. And there were times I knew that she already had the answer, or I knew what I was going to contribute was very, very elementary in comparison to maybe what was necessary. But the input built the trust, allowed me to feel valued, and there was a sense of belonging. So I encourage leaders to take the input, to ask for it, to take it, but then to clearly communicate the standards, the expectations, and the decisions. And you and I just talked about that a little earlier. You can have that banter, that healthy dialogue, but right. When we walk out the door, we're all on the same page.
You bet.
Taking the input, I think, really allows and fosters that team camaraderie, that sense of belonging, that sense of I am valued in this organization. And so I think that's very important. And I guess the last piece that I would offer would be to listen to your gut. And some of us are real gut people. Some of us are real heart people. Others are very strong in the mind, but everybody has a gut feeling. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage leaders to listen to your gut, ask why, and then where is this feeling coming from? Is it my own insecurities? Is it my own, is it something within me that I need to overlook? Or is there an external component to this that needs addressing? But I think some leaders are so incredibly intelligent and use their heads so well that they can easily overlook that thing brewing in their gut that comes back, to get them 3, 6, 9 months, a year later. And so being in tune with your heart, your head, and your gut, I think, is important.
Wonderful. Listeners, if you were listening closely there, you just attended a clinic on leadership with our friend Maren Walseth. I'd be interested in hearing about investments you've made to become a great leader yourself, Maren. Would you reveal for our listeners what is perhaps the best single leadership development investment you've ever made in yourself?
I know the best one, Michael,
okay.
But I've done a lot. I've done a lot, whether it's going to, college coaches, basketball conventions, going to symposiums on the weekends, taking in speakers, obviously reading, things of that nature. But what has elevated me was hiring a coach wholeheartedly. Hiring a coach. And I don't say that because I am a coach. I say that because my leadership advanced when that happened.
Right. I'll bet you do a lot to raise the level of your leadership game these days, Maren. Would you share with us what you're doing in that effort lately?
Yes, Michael, I do. I'm big on personal development. If I'm going to work with folks, if I'm going to ask things of my clients, how dare I not do that? That's just my own, that'd be hypocritical in my opinion. And so I do a lot of personal development. I am working with 2 different coaches, one on my own stuff and one in a business capacity. You have to remember, I spent 15 years in college athletics. I was not in the business world, and now running my own company, I know there are things that I don't know, and I need help. I need I need somebody to ask me the question, somebody to mentor me a bit. As I don't want to own a job, I want to own a company, right? And so I know that I need to work on that. I know that there are areas that I just am not strong in, and so those are two big things. And I like to read. I'm reading a couple books right now. Eaters Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard it. I'm absolutely loving it. But there's so much you can learn through podcasts, through YouTube videos. There's so much out there now, thanks to technology. I see very few barriers to your own personal growth.
Wonderful. I appreciate you, reminding me what a powerful guy Simon Sinek is. I've read everything he's ever put out, and I just think the guy's brilliant.
You're absolutely right.
My final question for you, Maren, what has made you spend so much time and energy investing of yourself in an effort to develop other people as great leaders?
That's a good question, and very easy for me to answer, Michael. It's because other people did it for me.
Wonderful.
Other people invested their selves and their time and their energies in me. And I think that is incredibly impactful and incredibly personal. And, whether I was a basketball coach for 15 years or transitioned into working with college coaches and working with business leaders, elevating others to achieve success, like that gets me excited every day. Honestly, seeing the aha moments and the wins that those I work with, my clients, that's why I do what I do, repaying it and paying it forward.
Spectacular. That's a motivating answer if I ever heard one. Thank you so much. Well, Maren, thank you very much for making time in your busy week to join us for this terrific conversation about leadership and the similarities between business and athletics. Fabulous stuff today, and a tremendous contribution to our listeners. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciated our time. Thanks so much.
We enjoyed having you, and look forward to having you come back sometime down the road. That'd be terrific. Well, that's our episode for today, leaders. We want to thank our special guest, Maren Walseth, the executive leadership coach who encourages us to stand taller, stretch further, and to dive deeper to unleash all of that untapped potential in ourselves and in others. We appreciate you, Maren, and thank you for contributing your time, your energy, and for sharing your story with our What Are You Doing listeners. Our next episode will be released in a few days, and we promise another intriguing guest who will share their leadership best practices with you and contribute to your greater success. Thank you, listeners, for joining us, and please reach out to us at info@michaelbeachcoach.com and give us some feedback about how you liked today's episode or about how you like the podcast in general. We want to hear from you, and we'd love to have the chance to listen to your feedback about how we can make this podcast even more valuable for you. We'll look forward to spending our next episode together with you. Until then, remember, there's an awful lot of untapped potential out there in this world, and each of us needs to focus and invest in ourselves and continue to invest in our teams. We need to release all of that untapped potential so we can change the world together. See you next time.